Today, we dive deep into a dark chapter of human history that is often overlooked in school curriculum, the Atlantic slave trade. Although slavery has occurred in many forms throughout the world, but the Atlantic slave trade, spanning roughly 4 centuries, stands out not only because of the staggering numbers involved, but also because of its lasting legacy from 1500 to 1800 CE. Somewhere between 10 and 12 million African men, women, and children were forcibly moved from Africa to the Americas, and about 15% died during the voyage. However, the education system has often glossed over or omitted crucial details, leaving us with an incomplete understanding of its scale and impact. Stay tuned to know about the areas dominated by the slave trade and the European powers that profited most from it. Firstly, it's essential to recognize that the Atlantic slave trade was a massive operation driven by economic interests. European colonial powers such as Portugal, Spain, England, France, and the Netherlands established colonies in the Americas, which demanded a cheap labor force to exploit the rich resources of the New World. Majority of the enslaved Africans were taken from 6 primary regions: Senegambia, Sierra Leone, Gold Coast, Windward Coast, Bight of Benin, Bight of Biafra, and West Central Africa, that is, Congo and Angola. After their arrival to the Americas, the slaves were sold in markets and even branded on the cheeks after being purchased, not unlike cattle. Contrary to popular belief, the majority of slaves were not captured by Europeans themselves, as their life expectancy in the sub-Saharan region was shorter because of the widespread malaria outbreak. Instead, African kingdoms and traders played an active role in the slave trade. Many local conflicts and wars were fueled by the demands for captives who were then sold to European slave traders in exchange for guns, textiles, and other commodities. The transatlantic slave trade was essential to the whole economics of the triangular trade routes and European colonies in America. Keep watching to find out more about the dynamics of the triangular trade routes. One aspect that schools often neglect to emphasize is the inhumane Middle Passage journey. Enslaved Africans endured horrific conditions during the voyage across the Atlantic Ocean. The slave traders were not only armed during slave raids, but the slaves were also chained, explaining how thousands of slaves couldn't overpower the traders. Packed tightly into overcrowded ships, they faced disease, malnutrition, and brutal treatment. Many did not survive the voyage, adding to the immense loss of life during this period. The first voyage from Africa to the Americas is said to have sailed in 1526, but Africans were bought as slaves directly from Europe even before this period. Before 1518, the Spanish monarchy didn't permit the transportation of African slaves, not driven by any humanitarian beliefs, but because they thought that the barbaric Africans would introduce pagan traditions into Europe and corrupt their society. However, as economic conditions worsened, this decision also saw a sharp U-turn. The triangular trade route is simply the trade structure that operated across the Atlantic region. This triangular trade route across the Atlantic took goods from Europe to Africa, including arms, textiles, and wine. On the other side of the triangle was the movement of African slaves to the Americas and the West Indies. The last side of the triangle was the movement of raw materials such as sugar, coffee, tobacco, rice, and cotton produced on American plantations back to Europe. The triangle involved 3 continents: Europe providing the capital, Africa providing the labor, and America providing the land and resources. And yet Africa was the only one suffering economically, while the other 2 parts enjoyed huge economic benefits. However, the transatlantic slave only made up for half of the total slaves traded. It is reported that Islamic traders were also transporting slaves out of Africa and sent out millions of slaves to Arabia, Yemen, Iran, India, and Iraq. The slaves were transported across the Sahara Desert, the Red Sea, and the Indian Ocean, while some slaves were also enslaved but remained in Africa. Furthermore, schools often fail to explore the resistance and resilience of enslaved Africans. Many brave men and women fought back against their captors and established communities in the Americas. Their stories of rebellion, escape, and cultural preservation deserve more attention in our history lessons. It's also crucial to recognize that the legacy of the Atlantic slave trade persists today. Its impact is evident in the racial inequalities, systemic racism, and social divisions that continue to shape societies worldwide. By understanding the historical roots of these problems, we can work towards a more inclusive and just future. Education should be comprehensive, giving us a deeper understanding of our past and how it shapes our present. Comment below to let us know what you thought.